Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Shane with Shane Media. In this video, we're going to talk about The Mean One. Let's get into it. The Mean One is a 2022 film starring David Howard Thornton, Crystal Martin, and is directed by Stephen Lamorte. So I guess they're apparently just trying to ruin everyone's childhood because we had this movie released this past week or so, but then next year we have the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, and then from what I understand, there's even a Bambi horror film in the works. Really not sure how I feel about all of this. I mean, I'm sure I'm going to watch them and maybe even have some dumb fun with them, and who knows? I may be completely surprised and actually end up liking one or all of the other ones. We'll get into this one here in a second, and I'll tell you exactly how I feel about it, but I certainly think all of this is unnecessary. You can let me know down in the comments section if you agree with me on that or not, but it's not like they're just completely running out of ideas. I mean, there's been quite a bit of original horror this past couple of years, so I can only assume that their actual goal is to literally ruin our childhood. But that being said, I will say of all of these children's properties, I would say The Grinch probably lends itself to a horror retelling probably more than any of the others I just named. You really don't even have to change too much to make it a horror movie. You pretty much just have to leave everything else the exact same, except you add murders to the equation, which is why I was so intrigued with this to begin with. And did it disappoint me? Well, let's find out. So first off, getting into the things I actually did like and appreciate about this movie, we actually have some pretty good, likable characters with some solid chemistry with each other in this film. And I mean, obviously I'm not saying that they're going to win any awards for this movie, but for a horror comedy based on The Grinch, I think the characters were about as good as they could be, and I mean that in the best way possible. I do not mean that as an insult. Obviously, when you go into a movie of this nature, you already have to temper your expectations a little bit, and you have to be fully aware of what movie it is you're walking into. That way you don't set unrealistic expectations and walk out severely disappointed. Now, because we do have David Howard Thornton playing the Grinch in this movie, I think right out the gate you're automatically going to have a good portion of horror fans trying to compare his performance as the Grinch to his performance as Art the Clown, which isn't really fair. They're two completely different movies, but that's just the nature of human beings. That's how they are. I'm not saying everybody's going to do this, and I'm definitely not saying it should even be done, but that is a thing people do, so that's just something we have to expect. Now, me personally, I didn't like Terrifier 1 or 2. I thought both movies were a massive letdown for me personally. I am not saying those were objectively bad movies, but I did not like them. You can see my full review for both of those movies on my channel. I even have a rant video for Terrifier 2. So, all that being said, I did enjoy his performance here a little better for what little bit we've seen of him. And that, we will talk about that a little bit later when I get into my cons. But for what we've seen of him in this movie, I liked it. I liked his performance. I like what they did with the character. And speaking of characters, our main character, and I guess you could call her the final girl of the movie, Cindy, played by Crystal Martin, actually does a pretty good job here too. I mean, there are certain aspects of her performance that I think just feel a little too campy at times. But again, this is a Grinch horror parody, so I went in expecting some of that. Now, was it all necessarily executed the best? No. But I think some of that was probably more to do with the script and less to do with her actual performance, because I think she did pretty good, and nothing she did was too egregious or took me out of the scene she was in. Like, I enjoyed her, and she even had a pretty sympathetic story in this movie. And that's another thing. This movie actually had a story, a pretty decent story. I mean, yeah, nothing to write home about, but It was an actual coherent script, one that you could actually get invested in, and you were actually curious to see where it was going. By the way, spoiler warning if you haven't seen this movie, but as they start peeling back the layers on this little town and its characters, you realize that some of the higher-ups in this town are up to something, and you're actually curious to see what it is, like genuinely curious. And while we're talking about this town and its characters, and again, spoiler warning, they don't use any of Dr. Seuss's original terminology. Like, the town is called Newville instead of Whoville, and they never actually call the Grinch by name. They actually have some fun with that, and they use a little play on words in a couple of scenes. It was pretty fun. I laughed. I legitimately laughed the first time they did it, but they call him the mean one in this movie. Now, they do such a good job with this creative trick that you know exactly what everything is when they put it on screen or they put a character in front of you, that you actually don't even mind that they're not using the original names and titles of things. And I haven't seen a behind the scenes with this movie, and I haven't seen any interviews with the director or cast or anything, so I don't know why they used this creative choice. I don't know if it was a deliberate one, just because they wanted to be creative and separate this from the other children's iterations that we've had, or if there were actual legal reasons why they did this and they didn't want to catch a copyright claim or something. I don't know. Maybe somebody in the comments can also let me know that. I'd be interested to know because I've been lazy and haven't looked that up. But I thought that was a neat little thing they did in this film, so I'm going to give it a whole point for that alone. And the last positive I have, which might actually end up in the negative category of some other people's reviews, it just depends on what your taste in horror is. But for me, I'm not a big gore hound. I mean, if it's used sparingly and it actually serves a purpose in the movie, I'm totally fine with it. I have no issue with gore in and of itself when it's used correctly, or what I would consider correctly based on my own preferences. But I can't just watch a movie that only offers gore. That was one of my biggest issues with Terrifier. It gave you literally nothing else. It gave you a decently cool killer, but that was it. I mean, I'm not so easily amused. I need more than that. So that's why those movies failed so hard for me. But take movies like The Collector and The Collection. Yeah, those movies had a lot of gore. In fact, those were very intense movies. Even by today's standards, I would say those are pretty intense movies. But I actually enjoyed what was going on. I enjoyed everything that the movie offered me in between those kills. I enjoyed the characters, especially the lead character, Arkin. So it can be done to my satisfaction. But what this movie did that I was so appreciative of, for my preferences only, of course, I'm not claiming this is factually the best way to do this or anything like that, my opinion, again. But a lot of the scenes were either off screen or they would start to show you the kill and then cut away, but then show you the aftermath. And that's the best way to do it if you're going to do a cutaway. See, I don't like it when they just rely on cutaways. I do acknowledge that theater of the mind is a real thing. In fact, theater of the mind is one of my favorite filmmaking tactics. But let's face it, most people going to see a slasher movie want to see, well, people getting slashed. So take a movie like Friday the 13th. I think it was The New Blood. That movie was hacked to death by the MPAA, and I think by now everybody knows that story. But that was one of that movie's biggest detriments. But there are tricks and techniques that you can use with cutaways to still make it effective. A lot of it is the aftermath. I know I keep referencing a bunch of other movies here, but take Halloween 2018. That movie did not have a bunch of on-screen brutality. But when you saw the aftermath of what Michael was doing, you were like, holy hell, what in the hell happened that is the end result? And it created a sense of dread, not just in the characters, but even in you, because you're like living vicariously through these characters, and it's building atmosphere and tension. To me, that's good filmmaking. Now, I'm not comparing this movie to Halloween Ends, not by a lot, but they did utilize some of that. And I appreciated that. They actually wanted this to be a movie with a coherent script and characters. But they also didn't forget that, hey, this is still a horror movie. And more importantly, this is a slasher movie. So they still gave us that. Now, I do have an issue with something they did involving our slasher Grinch. And that actually moves me right into my first negative, and probably my biggest negative of this movie, honestly. Like I said, I didn't go in with too high of expectations, but this one thing in particular really bugged me by the end of it. And that is the fact that you don't see a lot of the Grinch in this movie. I mean, his presence is all through the movie, so I appreciate that, but I mean, this movie isn't Jaws. This movie isn't John Carpenter's Halloween. This is not going down in history as a slow burn masterpiece. It's a Grinch horror parody. You're going to this movie to see the Grinch kill people. So while I did appreciate the fact that they did have some pretty good story beats in this, I still wanted to see more of the Grinch. I didn't count how many times he was on screen, but it wasn't a lot. And for me personally, that hurt the movie. And another thing, and this may even come off as sounding like a strange little nitpick considering that it is only 93 minutes long, but this movie felt long to me. And I get it. It's a feature-length movie, and compared to a lot of other feature-length movies, it's not even very long. But it just felt long, and maybe that's because they didn't have enough subject matter to stretch it out to 90 minutes. So it felt like this movie just had a lot of padding. And while that never really broke up the story for me or necessarily got boring to me, it is something I noticed. And I was thinking about How the Grinch Stole Christmas from 2000 with Jim Carrey, and I remembered how much more filler they had to put into that movie to make it feature length. Now, granted, that movie had far superior time management. It utilized its characters and its plot way better than this movie did. I'm not comparing this movie to that movie. That was obviously the superior film. But the filmmakers of that movie obviously realized that there wasn't enough source material to stretch that movie out to 90 minutes or longer without adding some stuff. So I guess they ran into the same problem with this movie. The only difference is they didn't manage their time quite as well, and I feel like it suffers because of it. And maybe I'm the only one who felt that way. I don't know. I haven't watched any other reviews of this movie, so who knows? But like I said, I did notice it, so it is going into my negatives category. But I really didn't have a lot of problems with this, guys, and a lot of it comes down to expectations. I knew basically what to expect out of this movie based on the subject matter. I mean, the marketing and the trailers told me I was getting a killer Grinch movie, and that's what I got. I got a killer Grinch movie. So I would say I was mostly satisfied with what I was given, for what I was given. So for a rating, I'm going to give this movie a solid 6. If for nothing else, the entertainment value alone. I mean, this movie kept me entertained enough for 90 minutes. And that's all I was asking for. But I'm curious, guys, did you agree with anything I said? Did you disagree with anything I said? Let me know down in the comments section and we can talk about it. But go ahead and like and share this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe and I'll catch you guys in the next one.